The time is December 1985, and hot on the heels of the smash hit Romancing the Stone comes a sequel that reunites Kathleen Turner as Joan Wilder, the romance novelist turned adventurer, and Jack Colton, the rugged vagabond who saved her life and stole her heart. This time they are sailing the south of France when Joan is offered an opportunity to write an expose on an Arab dictator who shows his true colors after Joan uncovers his detestable intentions. After surviving an attempted assassination, Jack teams up with his old antagonist Ralph, played again by Danny DeVito, to rescue Joan and retrieve a mysterious jewel that holds the key to the freedom of the oppressed Arabian people in Louis Teague's Jewel of the Nile. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your host Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of The Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. And when I say hot on the heels, man, I mean hot on the heels. This came out like 15 months after the release of the original film. And I saw this one in the theater. I did not see the first one in the theater. So I swear I was old enough to have seen Romancing the Stone first to know who these characters were. And then seeing this in the theater, even though it was not made for like a 5-year-old, I was really excited about it because it's the adventure aspect, right? That kind of goes back to the Robert Zemeckis fantasy of the first one, is that it's a romance movie, but it's got adventure for the men in the audience, and it's got like kind of the whimsy and excitement for the kids in the audience. In a way, it reminds me of like the old kind of swashbuckling tales of the 30s and 40s that everyone could get involved with. Romance and swordplay and fighting and alligators. So it only made sense that this film should have and could have been a smash hit, which it was financially, but not critically, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we get into that, Jewel of the Nile, what's your take?
So I'm with you. I didn't see the first one till after I saw the second one, and I didn't see it, I think, till way later, like on cable. Now, Romancing the Stone, to me, classic 80s, classic Raiders ripoff, but still a great movie. This one, I was hoping for a different rewatch. And I got to say, I wasn't a fan then, and I'm not a fan now. And I think I'm glad you brought it to the table because this conversation is going to be a little bit unique, where I do actually side more with one of our critics that I don't think I've really done on this show. But to me, I think these two movies almost should have been reversed in order because of different aspects that we're going to get into, but mainly because of the chemistry. And you said this one was right on the heels. You can tell when it comes to the chemistry and the dialogue, because it really didn't entertain me. I love certain elements of this movie when it comes to one-liners, but when it comes to the overall experience, to me, this was just dull. It was boring to me, and it didn't have the magic that I got from watching Romancing the Stone after this one.
I mean, chemistry-wise is what kind of saves this movie, right? It is those two likable characters where I almost feel like it is like a live-action romance novel. That was kind of the magic and the allure of the first one, is that she is a romance novelist and she's kind of thrown into her own live-action romance novel with death and adventure and danger and drugs. And this one doesn't really know how to capture that same magic, in the sense that this kind of has like more political aspirations to it. Remember, this is the 80s. There was a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East. They talk about that in the review. But there is a devil's advocate to this one that I have to say I have a special place in my heart. Even though I agree with you, it is not as good a film. And I can even go as far as say that it's not a good film. But it is a different film, where I feel like what kind of hurts this movie is the fact that it is a so-called sequel to a very popular and exciting movie. On its own, with these characters, let's say, not having been introduced in a previous film, I think that maybe people would have kind of warmed up to it a little bit more because the expectation's not there. It's not like Short Circuit 2. When it was released, people didn't think of it as much as the first one. It's kind of grown over time, and you and I both are on the same page where we think it's a superior sequel. Both of our critics felt the same way. This one doesn't have that luxury, right? But that's because its predecessor was so much better. So I own this film. It's on my shelf, and I do watch it. I'm not going to say regularly, but regularly enough. Like every few years, I'm like, oh, you know what? I like Jewel of the Nile. I'm going to watch it. Just like other films I've talked about, I think I watch it more than I watch Romancing the Stone. I can't really put my finger on why, other than that this is the movie I saw in the theater. It resonates with me. And I think that Joan Wilder has more to do in this movie than she does in the first one. She's not as much the damsel in distress. She kind of holds her own, and I like that. So, in a sense, Jack Colton's kind of the damsel in distress. He's the one that's almost killed. He's the one that has to tag along with Danny DeVito's character and be rescued by the juggling brothers, the brothers Karamazov, right? I think that is why I like this film, is because it kind of turns the narrative around, where she is now a lot more in control and in power of her own destiny, where in the first film, she really is the damsel in distress. I like that turnaround. Like I said, maybe not the best movie, not the best sequel, but I do like their character dynamics better in this one than in the original.
Yeah, I'll give you that 100%. I do like the narrative that she's not this damsel in distress. I do like that aspect that we don't see enough of in the 80s, in my opinion. But here's kind of playing the double-edged sword to it is it feels like something's missing in between these two movies. And it feels
Mhm.
like there should have been some growth in between or in the beginning, because we do have that aspect where she's not the one in complete danger. We have Danny DeVito that just pops up like Oscar the Grouch in a dumpster in the beginning of the movie. That feels like that there should be some prior, because Michael Douglas is opening up with open arms to this character. So there's something in between that just really doesn't resonate with the growth of these characters. Um, but at the same time, it does what a lot of 80s sequels do, which is give the audience kind of what they want when it comes to the characters they liked. I'm sure they went through test screenings of this movie and they wanted Danny DeVito. They wanted Kathleen Turner's character to have a more prominent role. But I think when I say that these two should have been reversed, during my second rewatch in the last couple of days, it's the chemistry was solid in the first movie, and it was a claustrophobic atmosphere in this jungle where it does feel like that romance novel. But here we have this open desert, we have this adventurous scenery, and we don't have any real intimate moments with Michael Douglas or Kathleen Turner to really grow that chemistry. So it's solely
Mhm.
reliant on this dull conversation of these two that have been together already, and they don't really have anything more to say of interest other than the danger that's being presented on screen. So within about 15 months of this movie coming out, this should have taken its time a little bit to figure out how they were going to grow that chemistry, how they were going to grow that magic that they got in the first one to utilize this open desert, this lack of intimacy when it comes to it. They've leaned a lot on the danger aspect. We see that with the fighter jet. We see that with the numerous villains that we get compared to the first one. So to me, I think they rely too much on the action versus the chemistry. And that's why I think it should have been reversed roles. Have the great chemistry, have them first meet in the desert, and then grow into kind of that romance novel, almost the sparse of what happens after you meet and you get abandoned in the jungle to reignite that flame kind of deal.
At the same time, I think that the analogy they're trying to make is the fact that since their relationship was built under such like extreme circumstances, that they've only been together for 6 months. Like there's only supposed to be a 6 month gap between when this movie takes place and when the last one ended. And so I think what they're trying to say is the fact that because their relationship was so explosive and firework like under all these dangers, that now that they're trying to settle into regular life, it just doesn't work. And that's why she wants to go off and do this thing and he wants to go to Greece. I think the point is they don't belong together. They are not good together. It is a romance novel and it's not working. Therefore, they need another dangerous thing to happen to them to re-spark that chemistry. And I think the film actually tells that story really well, because now she has the empowerment and the bravery to go do this thing that he doesn't want her to do because he wants to still go, sail down the coast. Now, I think the other thing we have to talk about too is that this is a total vanity project for Michael Douglas. It almost reminds me of like Rocky 5 with Stallone, where now he's directing and he has to have his shower scene and then you see his butt. And there's all these different like things to make him a lot more empathetic and sympathetic than the previous ones did. This is the same thing. Michael Douglas produced this one. He did not produce the first one. He had a lot of say in the script, and Kathleen Turner hated all of it. They essentially had to like debate and bargain with each other of what was going to happen and what wasn't, which kind of leads to why the thing does feel a little scattered. But like even the scenes of the opening beginning of him water skiing and him on the boat shirtless and stuff like that, there's a lot of vanity shots in the movie. So where I feel the first film really was supposed to be focusing on her, this film, although in the script, that's how it should be too, but on the camera, all of the best moments are reserved for Michael Douglas. The hero moments, the getting in the jet and firing at the tanks moments, even the Indiana Jones stuff that one of our critics kind of has a complaint about. I don't personally. But yeah, it's a vanity project. But fine, who cares? It's a B movie with an A-list budget, but it still feels like a B movie. And for me, being a B movie aficionado and appreciator, I can't hate it as much as other people.
And it's one of those, it shouldn't be hated. I don't hate this movie. I think it's meh because of so many just annoyances that it just presents itself on screen, or missed opportunities, I should say, because we also do have a lot of just sporadic editing that just really happens and characters that just pop in and out out of just pure convenience. So it is in some scenes fun, but it just drags on this attempted fun factor so long with cliche after cliche, and the 80s are full of cliches. This movie is targeted towards cliches, but I think the biggest problem with this movie is that they tried to do too much along with everything else but the script, and it goes really back to that piece of rushing it. And Kathleen Turner, and I'm sure the $25 million lawsuit from Douglas in the studio really pushed her into this one, because even the cast didn't have buy-in to this one. And it really does show to an extent, not in the performances because we have some great talent, but in just the overall chemistry. This is a pure movie of always something missing in one aspect, whether that's the editing, the storytelling, the chemistry. But this is one of those 80s movies that you can really just turn your brain off and just allow it to take you. And we see that from a lot of 80s movies. And that's what separates this from a bad movie to a meh movie for me, but not a great movie, because I can watch this and I can watch it over and over again and just be okay with it. But I will never get in that mood where I'm saying, man, I didn't see that before. That was a great shot. Because once you see it a couple times, to me, you've seen it. There's nothing really more to add to this movie rather than just kind of having it in the background as a distraction.
Well, and it's weird too because, Robert Zemeckis wasn't quite to his Spielbergian level as he would be after Back to the Future. And that's what he was making while this was being made by Louis Teague, right? So you don't have that Zemeckis magic that he was going to later be known for. Now, Louis Teague is a great director. I love his movies, but this isn't his style. This isn't his forte. He is more of a B-movie, comedy, drama kind of guy, right? And this has a lot of large set pieces and action pieces. He doesn't do a bad job at it, but he doesn't really know how to capture kind of like that screen magic that Spielberg and Zemeckis have kind of really built a career off of, right? Visually wise, at least. I'm not saying that Zemeckis is the best storyteller when it comes to characterization and narratives, but he knows how to tell a great story visually. That's kind of like his forte. The best chemistry in the movie is between Danny DeVito and Michael Douglas. Like, that's like the bromance. It's almost as if he wanted to make the movie just so he could hang out with Danny DeVito for half the film, because he doesn't even show up with Joan Wilder until like the start of the third act. And that's fine. I don't mind that at all, but I can see where it would be a big differentiator for people that were expecting that kind of hotness between the two of them in the first one.
And I think that's one of those missing elements. I wanted the hotness between Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito because these two, you can tell there's something you just almost want to reach in the screen and push these writers to do something with these characters because you can tell there's something more. And it's something that I wanted more of because there's some fun banter. The best banter in this movie is between both of these, and they have a
Right.
history, some unresolved history almost from the first movie that really could have taken this movie to the next level if these two characters went on that almost a buddy road trip to save Kathleen Turner.
That's what I was gonna say, is that their moments together remind me of like an old Bing Crosby, Bob Hope movie,
Yeah.
right? It's like a road to, and we only get maybe 20 minutes of that. I could have been totally cool if the whole movie was that. And that's what I was thinking about this last couple rewatches that I did, is that I think the things that would have worked for this movie is if that would have been the movie, like if Kathleen Turner wasn't even in it and it was just the road to wherever with Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito, I'm in, take my $5. Or they could have pushed really hard into the fantasy of it where this actually was a novelization that is kind of being played out loud. And at the end, you see the book close and it's the end. We've just seen the story told through a novelization. I think that's a creativity that, we've seen in the last, 15, 20 years where people are okay with having that kind of bend to traditional storytelling. I think this film has its feet too firmly planted in that cliche stereotypical narrative of these 80s action/romance movies that when it does want to be a comedy, it's not funny enough. But when it wants to be an action movie, it's not violent or exciting enough. So when I get what you're talking about, the Met, where it doesn't really commit to anything, it just kind of swims in the waters of all genres, and that doesn't work for some people.
In fairness, it's so hard to do, especially with a movie that's rapid firing a sequel right after the original. It's hard,
Yeah.
especially at that time, especially for our critics that we'll get into, to take that out of the mindset because the original just happened. So it's hard to walk into a movie like this and say, forget the original, let's just go on for this journey. It's hard enough for sequels now for an audience to do it because there are levels of expectation because they are making a continuing of a story or an expansion of a character, and that's what makes it hard. But we talk about and I did this last night of kind of what I would want to see from this movie is I took the beginning of the movie with DeVito and I took the last 10 minutes and I just put those two together. And that is a movie that I really wanted because we do get this element, and I think our critics do cover it, the Indiana Jones moment where we have him hanging from the top. Danny DeVito could rescue him and save the day, but he does the Danny DeVito character thing here. But then we get something that happens, and we've talked about this before, of the magic line, the power of one single line that can change the course of a character, the redemption of Danny DeVito. And that's when Michael Douglas is in danger and he goes to rescue and he says one single line of dialogue. It's unearned. It makes no sense, but this is that fun element that actually saves the movie a little bit for me because it does kind of put that cherry on top of the chemistry between Douglas and DeVito. And I can care less about Kathleen Turner at this point, but right then it just made it important how these two characters are in this movie when it comes to what they've gone through. It almost ignores Kathleen Turner to an extent and makes them more important. And that's, again, not to be repetitive, but that's kind of the movie that we want. But it does have those single lines throughout this movie that does make it stand out a little bit. Or if you're watching it in the background, you'll pop your head up from your phone, your book, whatever it may be, to just pay attention to it. So it does have good lines throughout the movie. We just don't get, like you said, consistency with it. And that jet scene, just so you know, goes on way too long with the action.
It kind of does. And then they do wander through the desert. And I never really recognized how long they are in the desert until they mention it in the critique. I got to tell you, though, I think that this film has a better villain. Like, I think that Spiros Focas, who plays Omar, That is a better villain than the character in the first one. Now, we don't have the Alfonso Aru character, Joan Wilder. We don't have him in this movie. That is kind of like what made that movie stand out. I think that might be the most quotable line of Romancing the Stone, the Joan Wilder. But I do like the zany characters in this one. I love that they have, the crazy gang that is looking for the jewel, and then the jewel himself, Avner Eisenberg. They talk about it in the critique. He's a breath of fresh air for the film once he shows up, right? Because he kind of fills in the gap that both DeVito and Douglas would normally fill with Turner. Turner has someone to play opposite with. He's got a lot of great dialogue. He's got a lot of great performance material. And then when he actually gets involved with all three of them, he kind of steals the show a little bit. And it's a very nothing part, even though it's the main focal point of the movie. So I think that helps a lot too. As for the political stuff and where this takes place and all the things that were going on in the 80s, I think that should be completely left off of the table when it comes to discussing this film, because it's not the only movie that played in those waters, but one of our critics treats it like it's like everything and very distasteful. I think that's just one of the things that he was trying to, throw darts at to try and explain his disdain for the movie. We'll get to that in a second.
I mean, you have sequels that, again, will expand. Yes, sequels that will expand the story, the characters. And you have sequels that it's okay. It's a taboo thing, but it's an okay thing to watch a sequel just for the characters and just to feel good for the characters. And even though I complained about it in the beginning with the Danny DeVito popping out of the trash can, I have to be honest, I'd lie if I say I didn't smile when I saw him pop out of the trash can, because he is a fun character to watch. And it made no sense why he's hanging out in a dumpster. It makes no sense on half the stuff he does in this movie or why he's in this movie to begin with. But I loved watching him in this movie. And the characters are a good revisit if you did like the first one. If you go into the expectation that you're not going to get the chemistry or the story that you did in the first movie, but it's a great revisit to the characters.
I also have to throw out there that I think it's funny that this is kind of like the origin point for future films, especially films that take place in Africa, where Michael Douglas has to fight a dude that's way bigger than him that he's not expecting to fight, right? And they did it in Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, and then they did it again in Madagascar 2. Almost as if they're paying homage to Jewel of the Nile, of all movies to like bite a scene from. I've seen that exact scene played out in multiple movies since. So I think it's a really interesting origin point for that cliche.
It's funny you brought that up, because I pulled that up right during that scene, and the shots were so familiar. I pulled it up on YouTube. It has to be because the shots almost mimic to a T of where the camera goes. So
they do.
It's freaky, and I absolutely love that fact. And that's one of those things down the road that you can actually have some fun with if you're placing movies into it. So I'll give you that one too.
Right. And okay, as a kid, that was like my favorite part. The whole time that we're there with that tribe, I think that's a really great break in the movie where we get like a little bit of a breather from all of the battle stuff and the political stuff, where we're with this tribe and they have the fertility ritual and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so anyway, as we get to the critiques of our critics, now that's one of the main reasons why I picked this particular movie, is because I remember this discussion being a little bit heated, and it's long. It's a longer conversation for them. But also, this was Gene's film to bring to the show, and one of the things that I think pissed me off about this is the two scenes that you and I seem to have the most complaints about are the two scenes that the studio sent them to screen as a part of this. The two most boring scenes in the movie are the two scenes that they sent these guys to discuss and debate. So they're not doing the movie any favors. And Gene just kind of runs with that. He's like, oh, they sent us the two slowest scenes in the movie, and these are the scenes I get to present as like my evidence for my argument. Anyway, let's hear what he had to say.
Was Romancing the Stone. I still think it's a horrible title, but it was a funny, charming, and rousing good film featuring two rascal jewel thieves, Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito, teamed up with a meek romance writer played to perfection by Kathleen Turner. She turns into a tiger at the end. The film was an original. Now they tried to copy it with a sequel, and I think they failed. It's the same cast, except This time, Danny DeVito has many more barnyard dirty remarks, and it gets real boring quickly. Once again, the film puts the romantically involved Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner into a dangerous situation, this time in the Arab desert, with her trying to protect a holy man.
Okay, so like he gives his description and he talks about how much he liked the first one, and then boom, right into this one where he's kind of saying the same things that you have said, and I am kind of agreeing with, but not all the things. Yes, they are thrown into this really quick adventure. It was a really fast sequel. It does seem jumbled and thrown together really quickly. I don't know why they didn't take more time with it. I really don't. When I was doing my research, there was no reason why they had to make this film like literally 15 months after the release of the original one. Like the original one came out in the early spring of 84, and this came out in December of 85. That's a fast turnaround, especially for shooting on location in the middle of the desert. So I get what he's talking about with, these characters kind of being thrown back into a very similar situation, except this time people liked Danny DeVito in the first one, so we're giving him more to do. But that's his character. The barnyard speak, the abusive tone, but also cynical, sarcastic tone. That's him. That is the character, and that's what the character should be. I can't imagine this movie without him in that. So it's an interesting argument from him, but again, like we've talked about in other episodes, he has such high expectations for a sequel that when those expectations aren't delivered on his very first watch, he literally shits on everything. And I think that's the direction he's going.
Well, and this is the piece that I don't agree with Gene. I will say that because when we go and he goes into the vulgar banter, the language, whatever he described it as, because this is where the comfort level is. And this is where I did find it natural is when we're progressing from one character to another, you're in this relationship with this girl. You've known these characters. There's a certain level of comfort where you're going to kind of have a looser tongue to you. You're going to have a loosened personality. So it's the evolution of the character. And whether or not it was to his liking, it doesn't really matter because no matter if the script was rushed or not, this was the vision of our writers. And our writers really did have a vision of how they wanted this character to be. So to me, I don't agree with it because this one is going to be subjective to how you want to see these characters progress.
Unfortunately, the film shows its real desperation with the Raiders of the Lost Ark style, last hit, snake pit scene played too much for laughs. We don't take the film seriously anymore at this point. I like it when it's just the two of them talking. The story they're in, though, bores me to pieces. We know how that scene is going to turn out, and that's the problem with the sequel based on the original that depended so much on surprise and character evolution. Here's the key. In Jewel of the Nile, all the characters are set. They don't change, and they run through a dumb story. Maybe here's one more thought. All of the terrorist activities in the world going on with the Arab world, maybe that had something to do with my displeasure with this film, because frankly, I didn't care as they run through the Arab world whether these film's heroes saved anyone.
Okay, so it's interesting that he went political with it, but I'm going to save that part for last. I don't understand what he's talking about where these characters are set. They're not set because they're very different than they are in the first one. Where in the first one, Jack Colton is kind of like that untrustworthy character at first. You don't know if he's doing it for himself and for his own self-pleasure, gratification, and payoff at the end if he gets the jewel, or if he's doing it because he really does care about Joan Wilder. We see that character evolution throughout the first one. And with her, we see meek little allergenic, cat woman who's in her apartment writing these romance novels, is afraid to go out, is afraid to meet people, gets sucked into a world of a kidnapped sister, of drug deals, of hidden jewels in the middle of the jungle, like that kind of stuff. We see that character develop. And when they get together at the end of that one, the idea is that like they're going to live happily ever after. No, they don't. We've already talked about it. We start this film off and they are in relationship turmoil. We discover that he is not as cool as a guy as he seemed in the first one. He just wants to sit on his boat and drink beer all day, and she's just trying to work because she's so bored with the relationship. The film starts off with a very different character dynamic. It's not set, and it changes throughout, where she becomes, like we said, more self-reliant, self-assured, and domineering, right? And then he, although chasing after her, has this constant cynicism about him where it's like, why am I even chasing after her? We see lots of changes in these characters, and it's in that third act after the meet up with the tribe and the fertility ritual where we kind of get that chemistry back. And that's very intentional in the writing. So I don't agree with him that these characters are set. They are introduced very differently than how we left off with them, and we take an emotional journey with them. That's the most exciting part of the movie. It's not the stuff that's happening to the country. It's not all of the weird James Bond villainish stuff that Omar is trying to do. It is the way these characters are changing throughout the film. So he's wrong.
I don't know if I would call him wrong per se.
He's wrong.
Because most of the time these characters are separated. And I think if I were to articulate even deeper, I think what they haven't changed is the chemistry. We're missing that chemistry from the first one. We've already discussed that. And that might be an expectation. But these characters really don't have an opportunity to change as they interact as individuals. Yes, we do see them change here and there, but when they are back together, we kind of get the reminiscence of the ending of the first one, where we have a damsel in distress. We have Kathleen Turner in the second act hanging from a train. So there are elements here that are very similar to the first one, but without the intimacy, without the curiosity, without any kind of interest happening except for a singular moving object like a train or an explosion or a plane. So it's very straightforward on where these characters are going to go. But I will say this in defense to kind of your side is we obviously know what's going to happen. That's not what this movie is about. And that's what really has that meh thing for me, because we know what's going to happen. It's in the damn movie poster. You see them together. You know this adventure they're going to wind up together. They're going to have to solve a conflict and put their issues aside, whatever it may be. So it is a predictable movie. And these movies, when they're formula, they don't try and be anything other than that. They're formula for entertainment. And that at times is okay. But this is what makes this movie really not, to me, the entertainment level, because it doesn't utilize, and it's a direction problem. It doesn't utilize the environment. It doesn't know how to focus on the characters versus the environment. It does know when to, like you said, cut some scenes short to really have that pacing go forward. So to me, I think the characters, that is the biggest issue, because they really don't change in unison together. They just have little snippets of Superman syndrome when they need to be.
I think that splitting these characters up allows the people who went and paid their ticket to the movie to really kind of cheer the person that they really like the most, right? So with Romancing the Stone, there's no question that Joan Wilder is the focal point and the hero of the movie. Jack Colton is kind of like the anti-hero. He's the Han Solo that comes in and kind of changes her dynamic, changes her point of view and what her goal is, right? Of how she's going to get her sister out of captivity. But in this one, he is not the Han Solo. He's like the broken hero. And she is tired of being a romance novelist and wants to do something different. She wants to write this expose biography on this guy so she can get out of the realm of being that famous romance novelist that no one really takes seriously anymore, who's being called hacky because she just keeps telling the same story over and over again in just different settings. I like that. I think it's totally different. I think that if you are in the film for Joan Wilder, there's lots of things that Joan Wilder's doing that'll give you the hero moment. And if you're in the film for Michael Douglas, he doesn't have as many hero moments per se as he does just those self-discovery moments, and also having that banter with Danny DeVito. It's a different character change. Like I said, it didn't even have to be a sequel. It could have just been its own movie, and maybe it would have been better received, because I really don't care that it's a sequel. I just like the people in it, and I like the journey that they're going through, even though the surroundings and the environment and the stakes aren't necessarily that meaningful to us. And I think that might be the problem, right? Is that at this time when this movie came out, there was a xenophobia against people, in the Arab cultures. So when you're putting like these people in danger and desperation, you don't really know how to empathize with them, because at that time when this movie came out, we kind of assumed that they were all the enemy. We didn't think about how they were actually people under the oppression of dictators. And we're seeing that now. Like, I think the movie probably plays better now than it did in the 80s, or especially in the years in between where we weren't seeing as much of that. That's a whole different conversation. I just don't agree with what he is saying in the sense that there's lack of character development between them, because I really think there is. Mainly because I signed up for that journey of seeing where they're going to go when they're not together and when they're not discovering each other for the first time, because you can't tell that same story twice.
You can. And I think what the main aspect's going to be when you actually look if the development or the evolution of a character has been successfully executed is the last act, the climax. Do we see everything that we've learned from these two characters go into the climax? No, because when they kind of get together, they're kind of back to the original people that we saw from the beginning of the movie. It's when, like we talked about, when they're separated, we see elements of that, but it really doesn't come together at the end to really summarize how these characters really did change. We just have Danny DeVito running in and saving the day, per se. So to me, I think, especially when we come to the villains, that really does feel thrown in to an extent that it's rushed with not much explanation to how this climax. It's visually appealing on how it looks with the colors and all that, but it overpowers our characters. It overpowers almost as a distraction to make sure that we don't recognize the end of the journey these characters went through when it comes to their development. So to me, I think the ending is unearned, and it just acts more as a distraction than kind of an ensemble really closing this story out.
Well, and here's the thing, man. People said the same thing about Temple of Doom. Like, Temple of Doom was everyone's least favorite until people wised up and realized that it actually was kind of brilliant. Because Indiana Jones is a dick in that movie, right? He is so, like, unsavory compared to how he is in the first one and in the third one. And Kate Capshaw's character, Willie, is annoying as hell. And everyone agrees. But now when you look at it, it's like, okay, well, that's the whole point. Like, they're really playing up on the old damsel in distress. We had sequels that ventured too far off from their original, and this is the era for that. I mean, it's just the year before that Temple of Doom came out into this one. I feel that this has a lot of similarities to Temple of Doom, where, like, the snake pit, 100%, I agree with that. But we are seeing unsavory sides of characters that we grew to love in the first one. So maybe if there had been a third chapter to this movie, it could have had the Indiana Jones legacy, in the sense of, like, hey, everyone loves the first one and the third one, and they were kind of met in the middle until years later where they realized, oh, well, the middle was just trying to be completely different. And then it had a course correct in its third chapter. Maybe that's it. I don't know. At the same time, I just don't feel like the hate for this movie is deserved.
Maybe it's because we've seen so many Brunuses on the television.
It's hard to charge that against the film.
But on the other hand, Avner Eisenberg, who plays the holy man there, is fabulous in this film. I thought he was so funny in the deadpan way that he kind of found that line between being a holy man and being kind of a funny straight man. And incidentally, I found a lot of other things good in this film. You put down that rat pit scene. You thought it was from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I thought it was funny in the same way that Raiders and Romancing the Stone were funny. I thought the whole movie was lighthearted and entertaining.
Didn't you think that, Roger,
it was fun.
Didn't you think that they ran through the desert just too much the whole middle of the film? That I thought was so weak. I wanted more of the two of them. Once I get to know characters in an original, then I want to hone in on the characters.
What you wanted from this movie in the first place. At one point you were saying you didn't take the movie seriously after such and such a point.
Right.
I didn't take the movie seriously from the beginning. It's a comedy. It's a romance. It's not supposed to be taken seriously. And as to whether you like the two of them together or not, it's not really just a love story about two people. It's supposed to be, to some degree, an action parody.
Yeah, well, I prefer at this point the two of them together more than the parody, because the parody didn't work because they were put in a boring place. How's that for an answer?
I like where Roger's going with it because he's speaking more my language. I mean, both this film and the first one start off with a reenactment of a romance novel, right? But in the first one, she's telling the story of the character in her book. In this one, she is actually writing the book with her as the lead, and then Jack Colton as, like, the Clark Gable character, right? They are in their own reenactment of this novel. So it's already setting you up for the idea of fantasy and, in my opinion, somewhat parody. it puts you in that place right from the beginning where it's like, okay, she is visualizing her and Jack in this fantasy world where he is still her hero because in real life he isn't anymore. I like that. That's where it puts me into the mode of watching this film and understanding why her character wants out, why she needs a taste of danger and adventure, because he doesn't want that anymore. And that's kind of what turned her on to him. So I do like that, and I disagree with Gene. I don't like the film when they're together. I like the film better when they're apart, doing their own thing, discovering who they are as people, and being stronger characters without each other. Because when they are together, they're distracted. They don't keep their eye on the prize. And she wants to get the jewel back to his people. She wants to get him back to the destination, and he wants the money. He wants the reward aspect of it. It just goes to show that no matter what, he is still who he is, and her character is the one that's really changing. I don't agree with him. That's where I see the movie coming from.
I do agree with this one because nothing screams fantasy more than being out in 103-degree temperatures in the desert. And for most of the movie, because it sets it up so well with this fantasy, this visual strike boat with, it just looks great. And then we escalate it to really wandering the desert with nothing really going on unless we know it's forced and it feels faked. It feels just, it doesn't engage us because we are so out of it on where this movie is going to take us next because it's so unpredictable, but not in the good way. So this movie does just kind of drag its feet along. If this was going to be a fantasy, if this was going to be starting the movie with Kathleen Turner really wanting to find adventure, find herself, then why couldn't they just pick a different setting than a goddamn desert? Because there is so many settings and ideas this could have gone. And you can tell our writers, Rethenthal and Connor, have no idea where they want to take this in this kind of going into the middle to the end of the second act. It just kind of drags. So I do agree with Gene that it does kind of drag along.
I will concede that part of this. I'll say that this movie has a brilliant first act and a very rewarding third act, in my opinion. But the middle act sucks. I will give you that. Once they get into the jet, because everything leading up to the jet, I think is a lot of fun. It is very Indiana Jones-ish, It's like running through the street markets and over the ceiling tiles and jumping into hay bales. That's a good time. I love all that stuff. The second they do get in the goddamn jet, until they're at the tribe up in the desert, right? Up in the hills. Everything in between that is boring and it sucks. I will give you that 100%. But I still think that the first act and the third act did everything that I wanted this film to do and did things with these characters that was entertaining and rewarding. And even though it has a cliche ending and you say undeserved with, DeVito kind of coming back, I get why it does that. It is satisfying that simplified palate. I called it bubblegum earlier, and that's exactly the way I can continue it now, It tastes great, and you want it. It doesn't last that long, right? It may not be the most rewarding thing ever, but you're going to buy more. It's just something that you have kind of just grown to like and appreciate. But yeah, I will agree. The middle act is bad.
I will also agree that the ending, I said it was unearned, but I did say it was fun because I love that redemption line from DeVito, and I love the fact that he came back because he's such a likable character in this one. So he does redeem himself, even though completely unearned, but it goes to the bubblegum. It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. So this is it's a tough one because Gene has a lot of good points. I don't agree with most of them, but he did take the time to make a lot of good points. It's not like some of the other reviews that we've covered where he's just like, I don't like this, and gives zero examples or reasons as to why, other than it was ugly, it was violent, it was stupid, it was blood out. He really liked the first one, and you can tell he had an expectation, and this did not meet it. But all of his talking points are valid to people that feel the same way about this movie that he does. Me being biased, I don't feel that way. But he does have talking points that are thought out and well articulated. So even though I don't agree with his assessment of this movie, I'm giving his review a B.
Now, this one's kind of tough for me because, Roger, I I see his point of view from what he loved as a critic on the fun factor with him. He does articulate his feelings on it, but I don't find anything really spewing out of just pure examples in comparison to the first one. He does state that this is kind of its own individual journey. He goes more on the defense on this one without really defining the why in a little bit more detail. And I get that Gene's throwing a lot at this and that I do agree with, but I don't think it's a bad job on Roger because he's passionate, and I love his passion when he's defending a movie. So this one's a tough one for me. So I'm just going to kind of play it in the middle, and I give him about a 2.5 star on it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You know, the one thing that I forgot to mention is the fact that this film had a song where the first one didn't. This one had the Billy Ocean song, When the Going Get Tough, and let's not forget that they had a music video for it where it was DeVito, Kathleen Turner, and Michael Douglas in like white tuxedos on stage with Billy Ocean as like his backup singers for it. It is so 80s. It is so cliche and terrible, but I love this song and I love that music video. And it just reminds me of simpler times that we don't see a lot anymore, where a movie had a song that they played in the movie and then they would do like the closing credits. And if you were lucky, there'd be an MTV music video where they would have like clips from the movie with the actors interacting with the musicians and the band and stuff like that. We don't see that anymore. That's one of my favorite things of the 80s and like early 90s was that like all-inclusiveness of entertainment, where we're bringing musicians right into the fold and then bringing the actors into their world. It's a lost art. I'd love to see that come back.
Deadpool 2, Celine Dion.
Okay, that was it. But it was parody, right? These
true.
were not parody. These were marketing. It's how they marketed it.
That's true. And I'm with you 100%. I think that was the main fun because me as a kid, I didn't look for any bands. I look forward to the movie soundtrack songs. I look forward to seeing the people that I loved on screen. So I do miss that. And I will give it get a bonus point. It did have that, but yeah, I do agree with you 110%. Those are the ones that really do amplify the fun factor and builds the excitement, because usually a lot of the times that was part of the marketing for this movie.
It was.
Or for a movie.
Yeah.
So I think that builds the fun factor to get people in their seats more than playing the same damn trailer 1,000 times a day.
One of the last ones I can remember before I saw that trend go away was, remember Guns N' Roses had a track on the Terminator 2 soundtrack, and in that music video, like Arnold is walking through a Guns N' Roses concert looking for John Connor. Like, I miss those days where it's like, we have a very serious film here with very serious messaging and social issues, but we're still going to throw the Terminator in a Guns N' Roses video. Yeah, I miss those days.
Classic. Somebody needs to bring it back.
Absolutely. So everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff to Back to the Balcony on YouTube, all your favorite podcatchers. You can follow me, Antonio, at the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast at thecultworthy.com. And you can follow my friend Justin over at
themoviewire.com.
And we are almost towards the end of our first year. I can't believe it. We just got a handful of episodes left before we jump into the next season, year, whatever we want to call it. So we haven't made a list quite yet for the new year. So now is the time to send us your suggestions. If there are any films that Siskel and Ebert covered on their show, we want to cover them. So please send them our way. They can be great films, they can be terrible films. We don't care. We just want to hear from you what you want us to talk about. And with that, I will see you next week.
See you next week.